Okay.
Yawn.
It'll happen.
We're good. That's on.
Okay. I did kick the microphone test. Does it need to be moved in any way?
I can hear you actually.
Okay, good. Okay. Let's sit for an hour and a half.
Okay.
I know it's crazy how tired sitting can make you. Okay, I'm going to talk about something that I know some about, not everything about, and no one could possibly know everything about. Which is an important thing to say, because anytime a teacher starts speaking in absolutes, run out the door. Right? So the Buddha, there's literally, scholars have found 80,000 different skillful means, upaya, to practice. Right? So 80,000 different skillful means were taught through the canon by the Buddha.
I just want to say
in the
that
teachings.
the next training, we're going to go through them all.
In one day.
In 1 hour and a half set.
It's gonna be stacking.
Yeah, we're gonna stack it. And so that's just to say that as the scholars that were counting that, I don't know if who of you have read the Pali Canon or are interested in the Pali Canon or have read parts of the Pali Canon, but every teaching is different to different people at different times, in different places. And this person that we're calling the Buddha, this teacher that we're reading from in this Pali Canon, that multiple people put together, had a lot of different things to say. So I just want to start with that. You know, I want to start with the importance of. I used to say the Buddha said when I taught. I don't say that anymore because it doesn't feel accurate. We read certain teachings that were written about in certain texts that we think maybe the Buddha said, but we're not sure. The teachings were oral for 500 years. So imagine playing telephone for 500 years, right? And then writing it down on palm leaves, them being burned, them being traded, them being translated, like all kinds of things that happened. And slowly scholars are starting to put things together and are kind of doing process of elimination, right? Analayo just wrote a great text that maybe some of you read, that he took Chinese, Tibetan, and Pali and placed the three of them next to each other and kind of played process of elimination and said, okay, well, two of these texts are saying ... So maybe that's more true. This one seems really off. So maybe that's just written by some, tradition. And kind of went through the whole canon in that way. The Tibetan, the Chinese, and the Pali canons in that way. Those are the three main canons. So we're working with a lot of translation, a lot of movement, right? And now that's not to say that we haven't gotten to some core teachings, because that process of elimination is definitely pointed to that. But one of the things the scholars found was that the Four Noble Truths is only referred to 4 times in the whole Pali Canon. That's kind of intense, because a lot of people use the Four Noble Truths as a core teaching, which it is. What is a core teaching is that there's a cause to our suffering and that there's a way out of that suffering, right? So that is a core teaching in that way, but not stated as the Four Noble Truths. So I taught that this morning, basically, next door. So I'm just wanting to give sort of context to this thing that we're calling Buddhism, a lot of times we'll throw out the catchphrase, in Buddhism, ... And you used it yesterday. Like a lot of people in their check-ins, I'm only calling you out because there was something interesting I found is that, sometimes we'll say we're unsatisfied in Buddhism in certain ways because it doesn't offer us everything. And it's like the Buddhism that we know, I don't know where a lot of you came from as far as lineage, but a lot of us are like Noah Levine or George Haas Buddhism, right? Which is great, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with those Buddhisms. But it's really important to know when you're saying the word Buddhism, what you're saying, right? So like in this country, in America, I wrote down the numbers, I don't know, 316 million Americans. I don't know how old that number is, but 316 million Americans. 2 million of those 316 million consider themselves Buddhist. Of those 2 million, 2/3 of them are from the lineage of Asian Buddhism. They're Asian born, Asian Buddhism that has nothing to do with what we're practicing here. Nothing. And when you talk to somebody who, I love talking to the woman at a place I go to get my legs waxed, and she has an altar, she has an altar in her salon, and it has the 5th century fat guy that a lot of people think is the Buddha. There's a statue of that person, and there's oranges, and there's incense, and there's candles, right? So I love talking to her about Buddhism, because her Buddhism and my Buddhism couldn't be any different. Her Buddhism doesn't actually practice, they don't sit, they don't meditate. Her family sometimes goes to a temple and does some sort of devotional bowing and merit making. But it's not what we have come to know, those of us sitting in the room, as Buddhism. So 2/3 of the 2 million Buddhists in America, yeah.
Is that 2/3 are they from Pure Land lineage?
Nope, they're just Asian Buddhism. So it could be Zen, it could be Tibetan, it could be Vajrayana, it could be all the lineages. But Buddhist born. So whether they were born in Japan or China or Korea or wherever and came to this country, but are American, so 2/3. And then the other third is this idea around American Buddhism, which is has a lot of psychology in it, has a lot of meditation in it, and has a lot of sort of, for lack of a better word, but non-Asian or white American, upper middle class, educated folks, right? That's the predominant culture in American Buddhism. And so just wanting to state that, because I hear a lot people just say the word Buddhism and it feels a little unfair, because what exactly are we pointing to? So important to think about this idea around how we're using absolutes, right? And being aware of that, because absolutes and view kind of fall in the same category. So watching how we as teachers, we as facilitators, we as educators are using certain terms and how it lands on people and how important it is to be accurate. Right? It's really important. And like I said, the more training I do, the less I'm willing to be absolute, because there's a lot to be said and a lot to learn. Okay, did that page. I'm not like George. I don't have a mind like George where I can just remember everything. I have to have my stuff written down.
Who does?
I know. So the lineage that, and I'm going to speak about and only from the lineage that sort of ATS, Against the Stream, Noah, Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein, Carol Wilson, Guy Armstrong. I'm going to talk about that lineage because that's if you're all here representing against the stream, it's important to know, right? And if you're not, that's okay too. So you can just listen and throw it out and whatever. But if you are, I think it's really important to know. And then also, like, we've had other lineages come in, because like Shinzen's lineage is a big part now of Against the Stream. And what would Shinzen, like Zen?
No, I probably would say Shinto.
Shinto?
Shingon.
Okay, so
Shingon.
Japanese tradition.
Japanese Triana.
But if you pin him down, hard enough, he says Mahasi.
Is it?
If you get
He says Mahasi. Well,
Because he says he uses, he'll,
denoting.
he says noting, he says, structure.
Yeah. Yeah,
But the way that he breaks down the aggregates is definitely Vajrayana.
the way he breaks down the
Yeah,
aggregates.
he refers to himself as a Pan-Buddhist. Pan-Buddhist.
Pan-Buddhist.
Meaning
And that's
all
like all the way.
Right, which is that's a good like way to not have to commit. which is fine. I'm not saying that in a bad way. No, because it's important. It's important because we all in a way do that. Like and it's okay to do. Right? Because if we look at, there's not many purists, because we don't know what purist is. We don't even know what that would be. We know that, so, there was this guy, and when this guy died, everything fell apart. It was sort of like there was 18 different schools that went off of, because people were like, okay, so when Noah dies, there's people that are going to say, well, even, Vinny and I right now, we're the guiding teachers. So we have new ideas about what's happening in this tradition, right? And then we're training different people, and those people are going to have different ideas. So imagine 2,600 years ago, when the Tathagata died, that people had different ideas. And so what happened was there was a lot of splintering, and this oral tradition got telephoned and changed. One of the things that's miraculous to me is that there are certain aspects of it that have stayed really pure, which we think. But humanity stepped in. Okay, so looking at that, humanity stepped in, wars happened, the Silk Road happened. So, it went from India through Nepal, kept going north, and then China, Japan, Tibet, all of that happened. And in each place that it landed, you guys know all this, but I'm just repeating it. Each place that it landed, it took on what was already happening in those places, right? So we're watching a diaspora occur. So already any kind of purity that was there, people want to claim it. The Theravadins really want to claim it. The Theravadins really claim that they are teaching the original teachings from the Pali Canon and the Buddha, which might be true, I don't know. But so just, I'm not going into the spin-off, I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff, I'm going to come back to the Theravadins, but, that all happened. So when we talk about Buddhism, being really aware that there's so many different voices and so many different ways to look at it. And then what we're doing here is pretty much Southeast Asian, Burmese, Thai, Sri Lankan Buddhism. That's what's being taught here. And that's what's being taught here because Noah's teachers went there. They learned from Mahasi Sayadaw and Ajahn Chah. Those were the two main teachers. U Pandita was in there also. And then now one of the popular teachers is U Tejaniya. And a lot of the, Joseph and Carol and those people are all now sitting and studying with U Tejaniya. But I just want to talk about the two main, the Burmese and the Thai lineages a little bit. And I love what you're doing right now and actually traveling to these places. I think it's really important for those of you who haven't had multiple teachers to have multiple teachers. Have as many teachers as you can. and then seeing, is that funny?
No, because we were just talking about it at lunch.
You were? Yeah, it's super important. It's important, and George and I were talking about this earlier too. Have as many teachers as you can, and shopping around too much can be confusing, right? So I really like what George is doing with having this really impeccable practice, because growth and progress happens by staying with one thing for an amount of time. Now, that amount of time is up to you, but it's important. If we keep bouncing around, we will never gain any sort of stabilization in our practice. So with that, being with different teachers, also paying attention to really having a steady and stable practice. So my favorite, so again, if we're just talking about, please be generous with me and me just talking about the lineage that we're coming from. And if you know anything that I don't, I'm open to learning new things, so that's okay too. I'm going to just share what I know. I'm going to share about the Ajahn Chah lineage, which I think is really interesting, and the Tudong, the Thai forest lineage. And then we'll talk about the Burmese Mahasi lineage, which you guys probably know better than the Tudongs. But, so the Tudongs, which are, I mean, it's such a beautiful practice. The Tudongs, so if we think about the time that we're spanning, it wasn't until about 100 years ago that the Thai forest or the forest monastics came back into being. So something happened in between 2,600 years ago and 100 years ago, where they were probably practicing forest monastics, but not in a way that was recognized. So Ajahn Mun, did everyone read the book? Okay, so then this is going to be repetitive for some of you, but just like so we can have discussion around it, and please share anything that you want to, or bring up a question, or let's discuss it. But Ajahn Mun was the one that brought it back. And the Tudong monks were people that were complete renunciates. They did not have a monastery. They didn't have a preceptor. They didn't have a sangha per se. They were wandering monks, pretty much on their own. They did try to stay together in groups for the most part for safety. But a big part of being a Tudong monk was to let go of the idea of safety. It was to constantly be in relationship with death. And Ajahn Mun would even send people, if he heard a lion or a tiger, I think it was probably tigers, not lions in Thailand. If he heard a tiger, he'd actually send them in that direction. And the Tudongs, they were allowed to have, I forget how many things they were. Oh, so the patched robes that they were wearing, eating only alms food. So even if a fruit had fallen from a tree, not picking it up from the ground, all you could eat was alms food. 1 meal per day, only food that somebody else offered. You lived in the forest. It says being satisfied with any dwelling, and then they never lied down. So you did not sleep lying down, you slept sitting up. Some of that was for protection, because if you lied down, you'd be more vulnerable. So the sitting up against snakes and tigers and whatever else. But it was just part of the practice. If you were sick, Ajahn Mun didn't care. You went and sat anyway. This is a very non-Western, non-permissive way of parenting, right? Like, this is like, it doesn't matter, you're doing it anyway. And the Tudongs, most of the Tudongs were okay with, they would rather die than give up being a Tudong. So it was really sort of like, you were wearing your stripes if you were a Tudong monk. There wasn't a lot of engagement with society. You did have to get alms from the people in the community, but that in turn was giving merit. right? So that's how the community benefited from you, but they weren't benefiting from you because you were giving teachings. They weren't benefiting from you because you were in service of any way. It was really just about exploring mostly the idea around death. Ajahn Chah met up with Ajahn Mun, and he was a Tudong for 3 years, gave it up, and then was asked by Ajahn Mun to start basically a forest monastery. So that they didn't have to live just under the trees, they wanted to start basically a Tudong situation, but have walls and protection and some place for people to go and actually be. So that's how this whole Thai forest tradition started. And it's interesting to think that it's not that old. We're talking, Ajahn Mun was born in the 40s, right? So it's pretty new. Not that there weren't wandering ascetic forest monks before that, but it wasn't, and we know obviously from how the Buddha was, but they would go in sanghas of 500, right? They always talked about, again, I don't know who's read the suttas, but they always talk about 500 bhikkhus traveling around together. And they would go and obviously live in the forest. They wouldn't do it during the rains because they didn't want to kill bugs. And so they would stay in one place during the rains retreats. But so this went on for many years, but this whole idea of Thai forest monastics is not that old. Not even 100 years old. So one of the things I really love that what the modern day activist Thai forest monk does is when loggers come to start chopping down the forest, they'll put robes on the trees. So they basically ordain the trees, and then the loggers won't cut those trees down. And I think that's really interesting. So Ajahn Chah started this Thai forest thing, and then from there was a bunch of Westerners that came. Suchito, Samedo, a lot of the Western, Amarvati and Chiphurst, and a lot of British, Ajahn Samedo's from San Diego. But they went to Thailand, and Jack Barfield went to Thailand, and they learned this tradition, it's sort of like the mobile home of Thai forest in a way. It's like the parked Thai forest, and then they started monasteries. And we now call that the Thai forest tradition. That Thai forest tradition, nature is at the core of the practice. So watching things, impermanence, anicca, is like the main part of the practice. Watching things arise and die. Death is a big part. The word gate to the deathless comes out of, or the term gate to the deathless, comes out of the Thai forest tradition. This idea around decay and impermanence. Jhanas mean nothing in the Ajahn Chah Thai forest tradition. They actually kind of scoff at it. It's sort of a really unimportant ideal. The idea of moving through life, watching things as they are, as they arise, is how they practiced. So there was no Four Foundations practice. There was very little study. It wasn't about, maybe in the forest they would have a book, but it wasn't about a book. It was really about engaging with natural causes and conditions and watching it as it happened. So it's pretty pure and naturalistic, the lineage of the Thai forest people. Awareness is the deathless, is the national anthem. So, the people that came out of that, whenever you hear Ajahn, that's basically pointing in the direction of the Thai forest, right? When you hear Sayadaw, it's pointing in the direction of the Burmese. One of my favorite Thai monastics is a female Thai monastic, and her name is Ajahn Neb. And she's really cool and interesting, and we are going to do a little practice together because I want you guys to have this sense of how differently the practices can be. I wish we could be outside to do an overnight. Maybe we need to plan a sleepover and a camping sleepover. Can we do that? Oh my God, that would be so fun. A camping sleepover, one of our, and practice outside.
We're talking about doing a 3-day retreat after the training is over.
Okay, so, oh, that would be fun. That would be fun. So what Ajahn Neb points to is that she says that every single thing that we do is a movement out of discomfort. There's not one movement that you make. So I just want you to pay attention for the next 5 minutes. If you move, why you move. Right? A blink is our eyes staying moist because it's uncomfortable for our eyes to be dry. When we go to the bathroom, it's uncomfortable to have a full bladder. When we shift in any way in our body, it's because that place that we were is no longer satisfying. Right? So paying attention to each movement and why we do it. And Ajahn Neb says we only move to move out of discomfort. I find that so interesting. And when I practice with that, it's hard to dispute it. It's actually really hard to dispute it. Because even hunger, even the things that we need to do, we eat because our bellies feel empty and we get a headache and there's our energy gets low. Discomfort, so we're gonna eat.
Breathing.
Pardon?
Even breathing.
Even breathing, right? Like if you didn't, it's uncomfortable. And she's speaking about this because she is a Thai monk, monastic, and she's speaking of this through her observation of sitting in the forest and just watching why she needed to move. Fear was a big part for her. Hearing noises in the forest. Women weren't actually allowed for many, many years to be sitting in the forest. And they actually still aren't allowed to do it alone. So practice with that a little bit. So let's do about 5 minutes. It'll be a short practice. And I won't lie to you about how long we're practicing.
I prefer to think of it as spontaneous.
Maybe we'll do 10. But watch even the mind's movement. So the mind's movement, the mind's involvement is the mind getting involved because you're uncomfortable, because there's dissatisfaction. It's trying to figure something out. It's trying to plan. It's trying to remember, right? Okay, you guys get it.
I'm going to go to the bathroom.
Oh, see?
Speaking of.
Okay.
Moving out of discomfort.
Okay. I'm going to ring the bell in 10 minutes. And just pay attention.